Brandon had spent 28 years in that bedroom, and for 28 years, I'd bankrolled every second of them. Today, that ended. I stood in the doorway, watching him scroll through a laptop I'd paid for while sitting in a chair I'd bought. "The allowance ends Monday, Brandon," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. He didn't even look up. "You're joking. I have expenses, Dad. You're becoming a liability to my future." "Your future is your responsibility now," I replied. Then I turned and walked away. I expected him to finally use that degree I'd funded. Instead, my son didn't look for a job, he looked for a victim. Within 48 hours, he was at my 81-year-old mother's house in Charlotte. He wasn't there to check on her health. He was there with a clipboard and a pen. I watched through the doorbell camera as my mother shuffled to the window, squinting at the horizon, completely unaware that her grandson's visit was a raid on her only home. He thought he was 48 hours from a massive payday. But Brandon forgot one legal detail I had buried in that deed 12 years ago. One hidden clause, and his fortune would become his trap. That night, I sank into the shadows of my office and opened the gray ledger that would tip the first domino. I didn't feel like a father anymore. I felt like an architect dismantling a condemned building. I made 3 quiet calls that morning: utility, landscaping, and the HOA. I didn't argue. I simply withdrew my name from the game Brandon thought he owned. I watched the live feed as he straightened his tie on my mother's porch, standing next to a notary he'd hired. He looked confident, wearing a suit I'd bought him for a job interview he never attended. I held my breath, watching the screen. He reached for the doorbell, unaware that in seconds his plan would crumble. Brandon thought he was playing a game of speed. He didn't realize I had been playing a game of architecture for over a decade. He was about to learn what happens when you stand on a floor built by the man you betrayed. I didn't stop Brandon on the porch. I didn't burst out of the house or make a scene. That's what he expected, a confrontation he could use to claim I was unstable or interfering. Instead, I let him walk right into my mother's living room. I watched the grainy feed on my phone as he kissed her cheek, a gesture that looked more like a predator checking the temperature of its prey. "Just a few things to tidy up the estate, Grandma," I heard him say through the speaker. "Dad is just too busy to handle the details anymore. This keeps everything safe." My mother, bless her, looked at the pen like it was a foreign object. She trusted the name even if she couldn't remember the year. While Brandon was busy guiding her hand toward that signature line, I was 3 miles away at the county clerk's office. I wasn't there to file a lawsuit. I was there to perform a quiet withdrawal of my own. For 12 years, I had kept that property in a private trust. Brandon knew about the house, but he didn't know it was governed by a single rule I'd triggered the moment he stepped onto that porch. The clerk looked at my ID, then at the document. "You're sure you want to resign as the manager of these assets today, sir?" "I am," I said. "Hand the keys to the firm listed in Section 4, effective immediately." I wasn't just stepping back. I was handing the house to a professional firm that didn't care about family ties or Brandon's allowance. They only cared about the letter of the law. I drove back and parked down the street. 10 minutes later, Brandon stepped out. He was whistling, tapping the clipboard against his leg like a trophy. He straightened his tie and smirked at his own reflection in the SUV window, clearly smelling a payday that would fund his lifestyle for a decade. He thought he'd outsmarted the old man. He didn't realize that the document my mother just signed was now worth nothing. The moment I stepped back, the house became untouchable. Lawyers, audits, court orders. Brandon couldn't move a single brick. I watched him drive away in the SUV I still technically owned. I pulled out my phone and made one more call, not to my son, but to the firm now in charge. "He has the papers," I said. "Lock everything down and notify the authorities that an unauthorized party is attempting to move a protected estate." A strange peace settled over me. The safety net wasn't just gone, It was now a cage of red tape. Brandon wanted to treat my mother's life like a transaction. Now, he was going to have to explain that transaction to a man in a black robe who didn't care that Brandon was my son. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for the first phone call. The first phone call didn't come from my mother. It didn't even come from Brandon. It came from a man named Miller, the lead investigator at the firm I'd hired. "Mr. Sterling," Miller said, his voice as dry as parchment, "we've reviewed the documents your son attempted to file this morning. He tried to fast-track a notice of intent to liquidate the property. He told the clerk your mother was moving into a state-run facility on Monday." I gripped the steering wheel of my truck, parked a mile away from the chaos I knew was coming. "And the clause?" "The clause held," Miller replied. "Since you resigned as manager, the house is now under professional control. Your son's signature on those new papers isn't just worthless, it's a red flag for senior exploitation. We've already notified the county sheriff's office to conduct a welfare check. We're stepping in now." I hung up. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I felt a heavy, quiet sadness for the man my son had chosen to become. Brandon thought this was a race he could win by moving fast. He didn't understand that once the professionals step in, the game is over. The allowance doesn't just stop, it vanishes into a vault he can't even find. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up. It was Brandon. I read the message. "Dad, what did you do? There's a deputy at Grandma's house. They're saying I'm not authorized to be on the property. Call them off, now." I locked my phone and set it face down on the passenger seat. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove to a small diner on the outskirts of Charlotte and ordered a black coffee. I watched the clock. See, Brandon had spent his life thinking the world worked on favors and family ties. He thought he could bully my mother because she was gentle, and he thought he could ignore me because I was just dad. But he was about to meet a system that doesn't care about his excuses or the fact that he was stressed. Through the window of the diner, I saw a tow truck pass by, heading toward my mother's neighborhood. Before breakfast, I had made one final call. Since the SUV Brandon drove was registered to my name, and I had withdrawn my consent for his use of it an hour ago, that vehicle was now legally unauthorized on a public road. I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot and bitter. Brandon had called me a liability to his future. He didn't realize I was the only thing standing between him and the cold, hard gears of the real world. By stepping back, I hadn't attacked him. I had simply stopped being his shield. The sheriff wasn't there to talk. They were there to protect an 81-year-old woman from a man who saw her as a payday. And for the first time in 28 years, I wasn't coming to save him. The diner was quiet, the only sound the low hum of a refrigerator and the distant clink of silverware. I watched the clock. In the world Brandon thought he ruled, things moved as fast as a lie. But in the world of professional fiduciaries and county law enforcement, things move with the slow, crushing weight of a landslide. My phone vibrated against the Formica tabletop. It was Miller again. "Mr. Sterling," he said, "the sheriff's deputy finished the welfare check. Your mother is safe, but your son, he didn't take the news well. When the deputy informed him that his signature on the deed transfer was being flagged for a forensic audit, he tried to drive away in that SUV." I leaned back, staring at a chip in my coffee mug. "And?" "The vehicle was flagged as unauthorized, just as you requested," Miller continued. "The deputy didn't have to do much. The tow truck you called was already blocking the driveway. When your son refused to step out of the vehicle, things escalated. He's currently being detained for questioning regarding that notice of intent to liquidate he tried to slide past the clerk. Somewhere behind those flashing lights, my son was still trying to talk his way out of something that no longer had an exit. He thought he was days away from cashing out. He thought he was selling a house. He didn't realize he was actually handing a confession to a firm legally required to report senior exploitation. By stepping back, I didn't just stop him. I handed him over to a system built for people like him. I read his final text message before the phone went silent. Dad, they're asking about the money from last year. They're looking at the house records from 2024. Tell them it was a gift. Tell them you authorized it. I looked at the message. Then I deleted it. I couldn't tell them it was a gift because it wasn't. I couldn't tell them I authorized it because I had no power to authorize anything anymore. The second I resigned, the firm became the only voice that mattered. And their only job was to find where every penny had gone. For 28 years, I had been the one smoothing over his mistakes. I was the one who spoke to the neighbors when he was loud, the one who handled the bills he forgot, and the one who cushioned the blow every time reality tried to teach him a lesson. I took a final sip of my coffee and laid a $10 bill on the table. Brandon had spent his life believing he was the smartest man in the room. He didn't realize that the room was built, owned, and maintained by the man he'd called a liability. He wanted to be a man of business? Fine. He was dealing with professionals now, and they don't do favors. I walked out into the bright North Carolina sun. My truck was the only thing I had to worry about now. The shield was gone. The world was finally meeting my son, face to face. And for the first time in his life, the world wasn't going to look away. The North Carolina sun was beginning to dip below the tree line when I pulled back into my mother's driveway. The tow truck was gone. The flashing lights were gone. Even the tire tracks in the pine needles seemed to be fading. Inside, the house smelled like lavender and old books. My mother was sitting in her favorite wingback chair, nursing a cup of tea. She looked up and smiled, her eyes clear for a brief, flickering moment. "Is Brandon coming back for dinner?" she asked softly. I sat on the ottoman across from her and took her hand. "No, Mom. Brandon had some business to take care of. Important business." For the first time in 28 years, he had to answer for his own name. He had to stand in front of the world without me acting as his filter or his excuse. I spent the next hour quietly moving through the house. I fixed the loose hinge on the screen door. I changed the light bulb in the hallway. I checked the locks. The professional firm called me one last time as I was finishing. "The SUV has been recovered, Mr. Sterling," Miller said. "We've identified the unauthorized withdrawals. Your son is facing restitution and legal consequences. Do you want to make a statement?" I looked at my mother, who was now dozing off in her chair, a patch of golden sunlight resting on her shoulder. "No statement," I said. "The records speak for themselves. I've resigned. I'm just a guest here now." I hung up. This wasn't a win. It just felt like I'd finally set down something I'd been carrying for decades. Brandon had called me a liability. He thought that by pushing me out, he could claim the prize. He never realized that I wasn't the prize. I was the barrier. And when I stepped aside, reality stepped in. I just stopped trying to save someone who didn't want saving. I sat in my truck and opened my gray ledger one last time. I didn't write down a dollar amount. I simply drew a single, clean line through my son's name. The safety net was officially retired. I rolled down the window, letting the cool night air fill the cab. My mother was safe, the house was locked, and for the first time in nearly 3 decades, I let him face the world without me.
I don't know the camera angle and stuff. Yeah, so but I wanted to have a word regarding that. Like sitting in that truck, I realized something. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop holding someone up. Seriously. Like because the moment you step back, you find out who they really are. Have you ever had to make that choice? Do let me know. I will read every comment, though I haven't received any comment. But yeah, do let me know and I will read it. Thank you.